Boy, I think I have the best view in the room. This is unbelievable. I'm so pleased to welcome all of you here. I'm Laura Linder, President and CEO of Jewish Community Partners, and I'm honored to be the first to welcome Governor and First Lady Haslem to our Memphis Jewish community. Welcome. So a special welcome to Shelby County Mayor Mark Luttrell. He is right off the plane from DC. Oh, there he is, okay. Congratulations on your honor this week, getting invited by the First Lady to sit in her special box for the State of the Union address. We were very excited about that. So in a few minutes, Tennessee's Commissioner of Economic and Community Development, Randy Boyd, will introduce Governor Haslem to all of you. My job this afternoon is to do the opposite, to introduce the Jewish community to you, Governor and Mrs. Haslem. We are a vibrant Jewish community, 8,500 strong. We have thriving synagogues led by dynamic rabbis and cantors, many of whom are seated right behind you, Governor. We have talented community executive directors and CEOs who run top-notch organizations and programs that run the gamut from early childhood to senior services. 10 of these dedicated professionals are with us this afternoon, also seated near us toward the front. There we go. Also, we are a leading philanthropic community, raising millions of dollars every year for our local community and for Jewish families in Israel and around the world. This is undertaken by my organization, Jewish Community Partners, under the leadership of our chair, Gary Kaplan, as well as Memphis Jewish Federation Chair Lee Harkavy and Jewish Foundation of Memphis Chair Sandy Blockman. Special shout out to the JCP staff who all pulled together to handle today's absolute sellout crowd. They're standing in the back, so thank you to them. We are staunch supporters of Israel with our financial support, our advocacy, and our travel. We give every Memphis teen the opportunity to travel to Israel. And each year we send up to 25 of our teens every summer on a summer experience. And in just a few weeks, 6 Memphis women, including myself, will participate in a national women's mission to Israel. And Mrs. Haslem, we have room for you. I would love for you to go. Our community is strong because of so many committed donors and leaders. And Scott Nodowich and Andy Groveman are 2 such leaders. I am personally grateful for the 2 of them and their commitment not only to our local community organizations, but to strengthening the relationship between Israel and the state of Tennessee. Andy holds one of the highest national leadership positions as chairman of United Israel Appeal, and Scott's longtime involvement with the Israel aerospace industry made them natural participants on your recent trip. They both raved about the experience and were instrumental in putting today's event together. So I am now pleased to invite Scott and Andy to come forward to introduce the next part of our program.
Well, good afternoon and welcome. Relationships really do matter, and all of us that were on that trip really understand the depth and breadth of the relationships that we all created with one another and among the group. 20 years ago, the then Governor Don Sundquist, my mother-in-law and father-in-law, Marilyn and Jack Bells, and key business leaders from around the state went to Israel to develop trade between our great state of Tennessee and our beloved and blessed country of Israel. Some 20 years later, that's a long time between trips, Governor Haslem had the foresight and commitment to lead another delegation in which I was privileged to participate. Now, the truth be told, my brother-in-law, Ron, was one day in the office, called me, and I happened to be at Israel at the time, and said he got this invitation, and he was enthusiastically excited about participating in the trip with you, Governor, and Crissy and Randy. And something came up at the last minute, and he asked me if I would participate. The truth of the matter is he probably knew the answer to that question. It wasn't going to be too difficult. Of course, I said yes, and I was the better off for it. It was a privilege for me to be part of such a wonderful group and to meet and forge new relationships with Crissy, Governor Haslem, Commissioner of Economic Development, Randy Boyd, to be more formal, and the many business people from around our state. It was quite rewarding and meaningful. This trip was coordinated by an organization called Connex, where our own Sam Chaffetz serves on the board, Leslie Alexander from the governor's office, along with Guy Tesler from Connex, kept us not just busy, but very busy. I don't believe I recall a trip, other than when I was younger, that it took so long to recuperate from. It was absolutely exhausting. The intensity and the myriad of activities that we participated in were quite meaningful. I think we met with individual companies and/or group meetings, a little over 100 different companies that we were exposed to. That's an extraordinary week of work. And the governor and Commissioner Boyd and Crissy led this delegation with grace, elegance, and we all would have been extremely proud. The goal of the Tennessee Trade Commission mission that we went on was to strengthen the relationship between leading Israeli and Tennessee businesses to encourage bilateral trade and investment opportunities, specifically focused on high-tech, biotech, and healthcare firms. It is a distinct honor and privilege to have the governor and Crissy sharing their experiences with us this afternoon. This was a significant first step, and I want to stress first step, that I'm sure will lead to even stronger bonds between our state and Israel and Governor Haslem. For that, we will forever be in your debt. Oh yeah, one final thing you might remember about this. I so enjoyed meeting your daughter, Annie. Now, the reason I so enjoyed meeting her was because we were at a particular event and we were going around the room introducing ourselves, and I'll never forget what Annie said. She said that she was your favorite. And so you tell her that I love that line and I remember that line.
So 18 Tennesseans agreed as business delegates to travel to Israel with the governor and first lady. Before we get into some of the highlights of the trip, I'd like to introduce the other Memphians besides Andy and myself who are on the mission. And please stand when I call your name. Steve Bears, who is president and executive director of Memphis Bioworks Foundation. Dr. Terrence Geiger, scientific director at St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. Greg Jordan, founder of Graph Story. Phil Ternary, president and CEO of the Greater Memphis Chamber. And we were also honored to have Dr. Janet Geiger and my wife Jill on the trip. Thank you all for the contributions that you made and for the valuable time that you gave up to go on the mission. Thank you. Someone else I want to acknowledge today, and I don't believe he was able to join us, is Ted Townsend. Ted is the Chief of Staff for Economic Development, and he hails from our great city, so you know I had to mention him. Ted is one of those guys that doesn't seek attention or praise for what he does. He's just a behind-the-scenes guy that's masterful at making sure that everything's in the right place for there to be success. Randy, please tell Ted we appreciate all the contributions he made on our journey.
So now for some highlights of our visit. Very short summary. We kicked off our trip with the co-author of Startup Nation, Saul Singer. This really did set the tone for the 5 days of intense briefings and visits, exploring everything from Israel's economic landscape to medical innovations to venture capital funds to learning about the Israeli stock market. We had some photos running that we hope you enjoyed. It had some snapshots of some of the different places we were. One of our stops was in a kibbutz Ein HaShafet, where there was a booming car parts business that benefits from a plant located in our very own Clinton, Tennessee. This visit really provided an insight as to the potential of trade that could happen between our great state and Israel, and will happen and increase in the future. Another highlight was we had the opportunity to visit with U.S. Ambassador Shapiro at his home. The location was quite magnificent and moving. I think the setting is a setting that none of us will ever forget. And these are just some of the highlights. Of course, we did get to see some of those things that many of you in the room have seen. We visited and toured the Old City, Yad Vashem, the Israel Museum, and we were very busy. So, Scott, to you.
So this was my 18th trip to Israel, and I know this term gets overused, but it was a trip of a lifetime. When do you ever get a chance as a Jew to travel to Israel with the governor and first lady who were making their first trip to Israel? As Jill and I reflected on the trip, we both loved seeing Israel through your eyes. I can truly say that the governor and first lady get it. I wish each one of you could have been with us just to see how engaged, fascinated, and interested they were. We're all in for a treat today to be able to hear the reflections of our mission. Crissy and Bill, I know I speak for all of us that were on the mission. We couldn't have been more proud and honored to have taken this journey with you guys. Jill and I appreciate so much how down-to-earth and approachable you both are, and we sincerely enjoyed the time we got to spend together and the friendship. Governor, now they were going to let me introduce you today. And they are going to let Phil and I come up and ask you some questions later, so you got to be ready for that. But something happened one morning in Tel Aviv that I'm going to share with you real quick, and this is the reason they're not letting me introduce you. I was skipping the morning session, which means that's code for sleeping in. And I was meeting with a friend of mine from Israeli Aircraft Industries who's on the board with me. And to my surprise, late in the morning, the governor comes walking in. He was skipping the morning meeting as well. Now he had a better excuse. He was going to meet with Shimon Peres that day, so he had a better excuse. So I was surprised, and I get all excited. Here I'm going to get to introduce my friend who's a general in the Israeli Air Force to my governor. The world's coming together. So I get all excited, and I jump up real quick, and I say, Uzi, meet the governor of Tennessee, Phil Bredesen. I have no idea where that came from. But the governor, he took it all in stride. He said, look, Scott, I've been called much worse. So after that, they thought maybe it was better if somebody else introduced you than me. Commissioner Randy Boyd is head of economic development for the state. We as Tennesseans should be very fortunate to have someone like him in this role. He is a very successful businessman who owns a company that produces 4,600 pet products under the names of Invisible Fence, Pet Safe, and Sport Dog. I got all those right? Okay, all right. He, at the request of the governor, took a leave of absence from his business to help the state. He's been a champion of education in business, and I even read somewhere that the governor convinced you to do this without taking any salary. We wore him out on this mission, asking him to take meeting after meeting with little time to rest. Randy, it was a pleasure getting to know you and Jenny, and I look forward to working with you on projects in the future. Governor, I knew you were smart. You married a girl from Memphis after all. But a good leader surrounds himself with good talent, and you've certainly done that with Randy. You must be a heck of a salesman. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Commissioner of Economic Development, Randy Boyd.
Thank you, Scott, for that introduction. So first of all, a little editorial comment, and just to say that we had just an incredible trip. It was successful in so many ways. It was successful from an economic development point of view, which is what we're paid to do, go out and track businesses to Tennessee and create relationships. So that was successful. It was also successful in just building a stronger relationship between the state of Tennessee and the state of Israel. And there was countless contacts and relationships established. But I just want to follow up on a comment that Andy made. For me personally, while all that is important, that's what I get paid to do. For me personally, the relationships with all the teammates that went with us, and I know that we're going to be friends for the rest of our lives. Even if we don't see each other for years, there's that immediate bond that we'll have every time we see each other. And it was just great seeing all of you guys again today. So it was a great trip. But what I am paid to do this morning, or this afternoon now, is to introduce the governor. And you guys already know him, so it's always very difficult introducing somebody that everybody already knows. So I'm going to cheat and share a story with you about an experience we had in Israel that I think actually does do a good job of introducing our governor. So as I think Scott mentioned, we did get a chance to meet Shimon Peres on our trip, and there's a lot of really interesting meetings that we had throughout the week, but that was the one that I circled on my calendar. I just couldn't wait to meet Shimon Peres. I mean, of course, everybody knows his history, but here's a person that has been president of the country 2 times. He was a minister 12 different times, 3 of those being the prime minister. And then he was actually the youngest foreign minister in the history of Israel. He was the defense minister at age 27. And in addition to all that, he also won a Nobel Prize. So somebody that I was just fascinated to get a chance to meet. But as you also know, he's 92 years old. And so I'm thinking, at 92 years old, he's probably not going to be that reticent, and I just wasn't sure what to expect really, but it didn't matter. Just being in his presence and presence of such greatness, it was going to be just a great experience. But I was so wrong. He was so perceptive and intelligent and wise, and he blew us away. In fact, we had such a great meeting. I don't get in trouble with my boss too often, but I know I did at the end of the meeting when we were walking out, and he looks at me and says, "I hope you were taking notes." And no, I was just as entranced as you were. I didn't take a single note. So I made a point to try to remember a couple of lines that he shared with us. So when we first arrived, knowing that people were probably a little intimidated by him, what kind of question do you start off with? So he gave us the first question, and he said, people always ask me, in your long career, what was your biggest success? What's the thing you're most proud of? And he said, I always tell them my biggest success will be what I'm going to do tomorrow. So he's 92 years old. My biggest success will what I will do tomorrow. And then they always ask me, so in your career, what was your greatest failure? And I always tell them my greatest failure was I didn't dream big enough. Then he encouraged us, always dream big. There's lots of other things that I didn't write down and didn't remember. But at the end, he concluded by saying, you're old when you can count more accomplishments than you can dreams of the future. And you're young when you can count more dreams of the future than you can accomplishments of the past. And so with that, I'd like to introduce to you the very, very young First Lady and Governor of the state of Tennessee, Bill Haslem. Thank you.
Well, I get to go first. And let me first start by saying, please eat your lunches. I don't want to stand between anybody and their lunch. And we have spoken many, many times with people eating their lunch. So you've got 5 minutes while I speak, eat your lunch, then you can turn around and listen to Bill. No. So many wonderful memories. When we first arrived in Israel, we drove straight to Jerusalem, and our driver said, I want you to, before I take you to a hotel, you have to see Jerusalem from atop one of our hills. You have to witness this, and I'm going to take you to my favorite spot. So he did. He took us to his favorite spot, and we got out of the car, and he was right. He was absolutely right. You have to see the city from one of the hills. And he pointed out all of the places that we were getting ready to visit, and it was thrilling. It was beautiful. It was exciting. You could just see the history in this city. You could see the current events that have been happening and unfolding. You could see the the sparkling white stone, and it's beautiful any time of the day, but it's especially beautiful when the sun is shining or when the sunset, when it glows in the sunset. So I was very thrilled to see the city and then to drive down into it, and we checked in, we ate our dinner, and it was the Sabbath. So we went straight to the old city, and that was so exciting because we got there right as the families were coming out of the synagogues and got to see these beautiful families, all dressed up, many of them Orthodox, of course. And they were coming out of the synagogue excited and chatting and talking, and there were grandparents with grandchildren and daddies pushing strollers and young mothers and lots of children. And everybody was just thrilled and excited. You could tell they had a light in their eyes. And we just loved watching that. We walked down to the Wailing Wall, and I had my prayers already written out on a piece of paper. So I was ready to put them in there and spent some time there. 2 out of 3 of those have been answered, by the way. Actually, 2.5.
The one about the patient husband didn't happen.
2.5. And then after the Wailing Wall, we walked back up those long steps, back up out of the old city. And as we were going up those steps, there were 2 daddies pulling their strollers backwards up those steps, pulling them. And one of the gentlemen who was with us said, let me help you there, let me help you. And he was a big, strong guy, and he grabbed both ends of those strollers and helped these dads take them up the stairs. And as we got to the top, of course, their families had beat them to the top. As we got to the top and they landed their strollers, 2 little boys, probably about 3 and 4 years old, ran out and said, "Abba, Abba," and they leapt into their father's arms. And I know Annie and I just melted. We just said, "Oh, this is the most beautiful thing." And these families are just beautiful and so excited, and we were so excited to be there. So that's just one of those moments that Annie and I still talk about. And we still, I don't know why, maybe it was because we had first gotten there, but it was such a special moment to us. Israel's a place of history, as you know, ancient and current. And it's not just the place that's so impressive, but the people. And of course, we had a wonderful group, as been said, that went with us from all over the state. And we had wonderful tour guides. We had met people that were warm and welcoming everywhere we went. And while the business delegation was out doing business, the spouses, there were about 10 of us, got to tour. And we got to see really just everything in Israel. We would leave really, really early, and we would get back really, really late with like 20 minutes to change for dinner. You remember that? And for women, that's not really a happy thing to learn. So we would run up and run back down, but we didn't want to miss anything. And we were able to see so much in Jerusalem. We went to Bethlehem and Nazareth. We went to the Dead Sea and floated and put mud all over ourselves. We went to Masada on a day that was over 100 degrees up there. We went to Tel Aviv and many, many more places. I was a little surprised. The thing that surprised me the most probably was that Israel is such a small country, and I guess smaller than I imagined. And that was good because we could see so much in a short time because the distances were very close, just a 2-hour drive or an hour-and-a-half drive here or there. But it also meant that their very aggressive neighbors were very close. And I learned they really do live in a very rough neighborhood. And there were many times when they said, 50 miles over that way is so-and-so. And we were like, let's don't go there. It was interesting to see the young soldiers, the young people who were serving in the military just out of high school, and to learn more about the military. But my favorite 2 stops, and I'm just going to tell you about these 2, were briefly, I'll tell you briefly, we visited 2 schools. And of course, I love visiting schools. I visited a lot of schools across the state of Tennessee, and so these 2 schools really were probably some of my favorite visits. Since I'm interested in the early years of children's lives, we visited a preschool, and that had been arranged ahead. It was not your normal preschool in Israel. It's called the Orchard of Abraham's Children, and it's run by a Jewish woman and her Palestinian husband. And so obviously it was a very controversial kind of arrangement, but they needed a place to educate their children, so they started a school where they welcome Jewish children and Palestinian children. And it's a bilingual school, speaking Hebrew and Arabic during the day. They celebrate all the cultural holidays, and they seek to build bridges of reconciliation between both communities. as they taught these children, they obviously reach out to the parents and break down barriers with those parents. They would hold fundraisers, and they would have music from both cultures come and play, or they would have speakers from both cultures come and play, or come and speak. So people were learning about each other and learning to appreciate each other. Their goal was acceptance, not fear, and peace and love rather than hatred. And as we sat in that orchard outside that preschool, where the playground was over here in the little garden the children had planted, and we heard from these two people about what they were doing and what they were trying to accomplish. It was just a beautiful, beautiful afternoon, and I think we all felt the love and the peace that was there, and I think our entire group just really, really appreciated that place and that time with those special people. Finally, then the last day that we visited, we visited a high school. And we sat with students and teachers, and we heard a wonderful speaker. Then we broke into small groups, and we were able to talk to the students, talk to some teachers and parents. And we could ask questions, whatever we wanted to ask them, so that was really fun. It's great to be around young people. And I remember one young man saying, when I was 5 or 6 or 7 years old, he said, well, maybe even to middle school. He said, I was afraid. I was afraid of joining the military. I knew it was coming, and I was afraid of being a soldier. But he said, now that I'm a junior and I'm almost graduating, he said, I know it's the right thing to do. And I know that I want to do this for my country, and I know that it will be good for me. We talked to a couple of parents who said, yeah, we want them to do this, but we don't like it. I mean, for the time they're in the military, we're on edge. We're worried. We're thinking, what's going to happen to our children? But we know it's the right thing to do. And we began to think about these children going off and having this experience before college, and then being in the military, and then the fact that Israel is called the startup nation. And we thought, well, maybe they learn to take more risk. Maybe they learn what risk is all about when they're in the military, so that when they're out of school, they're willing to take more risk in the things that they do, and the companies they start, and the ventures that they get into. I'd met one young man that night who had actually been in an exchange program here in Tennessee, and he had come to Knoxville. And I said, oh, I know Knoxville. I grew up I raised our children in Knoxville. And he mentioned the family he lived with. I said, I've heard their name. And he said, I said, did you make many friends? He said, well, I have one special friend that I keep up with, and we email back and forth. And he told me his name, and he said he's a big football player at this certain school. And I said, you won't believe this, but tomorrow night, we're going to be at that school. My husband's given an award at that football game. He said, you're kidding. That's crazy. Well, if you see him, and I thought, well, I won't see him. He's playing football. But as I sat in the bleachers, I heard this young man's name called out time after time. He was obviously a really good football player. And I thought, oh, my goodness. I met his friend yesterday in Israel. And I don't know, I felt a new connection. I felt a new hope for Israel and for our relationship, just because of the proximity of that coming together in that way. And I guess in conclusion, when asked what we can do to show our support and strengthen ties between Israel and Tennessee, I would say, well, make the trip if you can, if you haven't been, or make it again, or make it 18 times. But for those of you who have been, tell the story. Tell your stories. I think that is how wisdom is passed. It's how it's been passed along through the centuries. So tell your stories, and thanks for letting me tell a couple of my stories today.
So if I had any brains at all, I'd just say, I'm Bill Haslem. I approve that message. Enjoy lunch. Actually, Scott didn't know this, but when he accidentally introduced me as Phil Bredesen, it was actually fairly appropriate because this is interesting. The whole way the trip came about was after I had been elected governor 5 years ago, but before I'd been sworn in, I went to see Governor Bredesen. And I think it's always smart if you're taking somebody's place to say, well, what are your regrets? What do you wish you'd gotten done that you hadn't gotten done? And we talked about a few things. We talked about a few current problems in state government. I'm getting ready to walk out of what was then his office, what's now mine. And he said, hey, Bill, one more thing. And I said, what? He goes, I actually always wanted to take an economic development trip to Israel and never got it done. So I just thought, sounds like, kind of filed that away. And we kept thinking about, is there a time? And finally we thought, we came up with this date. But the real reason we ever went on the trip was Phil Bredesen saying that was his big regret. And I will start by saying this. Here's how strongly I feel about this visit. If somebody said, tell me one place that I should go before I die, I would say go to Jerusalem. And I'd say that without hesitance. For me, it was kind of right up my areas of interest. There's 4 or 5 things that I love. I love government. I love history. I love, my faith matters a great deal to me. And I love business. And so if you think about what you see when you're in Israel, you get to see all those things, but you see them in spades, if you will, because of the intensity of the experience. In government, it was interesting. We got to talk to Shimon Peres, which was fascinating. We also got to speak with Prime Minister Netanyahu. And I told somebody, it helps you to understand this relatively small country to meet these 2 really different people who have been leaders of their own country. It's like being from Georgia and having Jimmy Carter and having Newt Gingrich. They're both from the same place. They both look a little similar, but they have very different views of what should happen. But the chance to sit and talk with both of them about the real life challenges facing their country for somebody who's in public office was fascinating. From the business standpoint, I wasn't prepared for, I'd heard about Israel being a startup nation. We have some relationships with some Israeli companies, so I knew that. But to see Tel Aviv and the modern economic hub that it is was beyond eye-opening to me. And it was fascinating to me what's coming out of there. And again, I think Crissy nailed it. I mean, I think the fact that Israel lives surrounded by challenges means they have to be more innovative. They have to be open to risk. And I think it's driven this incredible entrepreneurial nation, which is way out punching its weight class when it comes to economic development. So that was great. And then the history part, that very first, when we came up in the guide above the city and showed us everything, and he goes, probably about there is where Abraham walked up with Isaac. And later we're in the city of David. You know, it's down the hill from the Temple Mount. And they tell the story that until 150 years ago, everybody thought maybe the biblical city where the kings and prophets roamed was up there, and then they realized, no, it's down here. Told the story about where the City of David organization was going to put a visitor. They had a visitor center, and then they came to him and said, you're probably going to have to move your visitor center. He said, why? I said, well, we're pretty sure David's palace is right below here. I said, all right, sounds like a decent reason to move. But then the fascinating thing is they go and they buy the parking lot across the street, and some of you all have been there and seen this, and they say they're getting ready to do that, but when whatever the Bureau of Antiquities is called in Israel, before they could dig up the parking lot, they started doing some research. They found, under here is probably 2 or 3 of the succession of temples, and underneath that site is where they have found, just as recently as a month ago, you might have seen this, actually right in the middle of Hanukkah, they found a coin with King Hezekiah's name on it. And somebody help me. Hezekiah would have been 2,800 years ago. One of the rabbis nod their head and say, I'm close. Okay. From a time when people wondered, this whole story about the Jewish nation and being here, is that whole thing just kind of made up? And then you actually find a coin with Hezekiah's name on it from 2,800 years ago. And then during Hanukkah, and I had a chance to speak at one of the synagogues in Nashville on the 3rd night of Hanukkah, and it was fascinating to me. I mean, that whole story, like a lot of people thought, well, this whole thing with the Maccabees, that had to be made up, because we would have found some remnant of that Greek fortress. If it was that big, we would have found some remnant of it if it ever existed. And then in that same area, underneath that same parking lot, they found the foundations of a fort, 200 meters, so 1/8 of a mile by 60 meters, where they found arrowheads and jugs of wine and everything dated to that exact period. So for somebody who grows up loving history and thinking the importance of what happened in the past really does affect us today, there could be no more interesting place to be than Israel. We go out one day and we went up to the Golan Heights. You can hear all about the Golan Heights and why they mattered and why that was such a critical thing in that battle. And then you go see how close the Golan Heights are to where people are living below, and you realize that was an incredibly strategic objective that had to happen. So whether the history was 3,000 years ago or whatever the Golan Heights would be, was that 47 years ago, if I did my math right, Israel is filled with that. And all of it is significant for the challenges that we face today. Crissy talked about her favorite moment, maybe a couple of those. I'll tell you what mine was. We had it is nice to go to Israel as governor because you get special treatment. One of those things was a guide who was with us all week who was fasting. His father had come to Israel in 48. He had served in the army. And so throughout this week, when we're traveling all over the country, he's telling us stories and issues. And so we talk about some of those critical issues. So at the end of it, the last day, I said, so tell me the challenges from, you live in this is a really bad neighborhood where the neighbors, or as Crissy said, are not only aggressive, that was a nice way to put it, aggressive, and would like to see you go away. You live in a neighborhood that's not only aggressive and like to see you go away, but the neighborhood itself is crumbling. What was Syria, what was Lebanon, Iraq, everything around you is rapidly changing. You live in a neighborhood where you're the only democracy. And so you're playing by a set of rules that nobody else around you is playing by. You live in a neighborhood where we were right there when they were negotiating the Iran nuclear deal and realizing the imminent threat from that. You live in a country that, again, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I'm right here, late 1897, I think there were 46,000 Jews in Israel, 46,000. Today there's 6 million, okay? There's 6.5 million Tennesseans. So there are 6 million Jews, same number of as people are in Tennessee, that's how many Jews live in Israel. But there's some challenges around that as well, because it's a democracy and everybody gets to vote, and because some of the Palestinian population is multiplying faster. You're in an area where 5 years from now, there could easily be more Palestinians than there are Jews in Israel, and the challenges affecting that in a democracy. You live in a country where a certain percentage of the population has been set aside to pray, but that percentage of the population is growing real rapidly, and they don't serve in the military, and they aren't engaged in commerce. And what kind of effect does that have on the country? So if you're somebody like me whose faith matters to them, who loves history, who is involved in politics, there could be no more interesting place than Israel. But anyway, we're walking through these challenges, and we're walking through that whole list of challenges at the end of the week, and it's the last morning that we're there. And I said to the guide, I said, of all that, the bad neighborhood, the economic challenges, the changing demographics of Israel, Iran having nuclear weapons, what concerns you the most? He said, easy. He said, I'm really worried that the younger generation won't understand the sacrifice that's involved in having us be where we are today. That makes a lot of sense, right? All of us are at some point where whoever is the people who are the pioneers, they're setting the battle, and then the settlers, and then the people who build something, and then the folks who come in on the back of that, whether it be in Israel or in our world or in a business, they don't appreciate what that's like and the sacrifice that was involved. They feel the threat, obviously, but they may or may not appreciate the sacrifice. Now, you could say, well, that's the words of an old soldier whose family has been there for a long time, but I personally thought there was a lot of wisdom in that. So for us, and I think I'm supposed to have Andy and Scott come up. We're supposed to let Andy and Scott come up and ask questions, but it was the trip of a lifetime. And I would tell anybody that I met who said, I've got some free time next year, I can go anywhere I want around the world, where would you go? My answer is easy. Next year, make it Jerusalem. So with Andy and Scott, we'll have you guys come up and...
Not exactly.
Oh, sorry, not Andy, it's Phil, sorry.
But
Andy missed a chance to talk. This is
not exactly. Yeah, like both of you said, this is such an amazing experience for everyone on the trip. What do you think the next steps will be to try to actualize more business between Tennessee and Israel?
I probably should let Randy jump in on that some if you want to add something to that. But we made a lot. It's like make a sales call. So you make a lot of contacts, and we're following up with that. I think we felt like there was a lot of opportunity, particularly in the healthcare IT sector. IT is so strong there. Tennessee has a strong healthcare presence in Nashville, but in Memphis as well. And we think both Nashville and Memphis economies can maybe. We think there's some big opportunity, primarily in healthcare IT, but there were several other things like that as well.
If you think about it, we've talked about this experience, but as Memphians and Tennesseans, what would you suggest the best way for us to further the relationship between Israel and Tennessee and Memphis?
I'm going to let Crissy jump in there if she wants. I love what you all are doing here with giving every high school student a chance to go to Israel. I can't think of anything that's smarter, that's a better strategy. I think the second thing is, I think we started to build those contacts. We're going to keep those going from the state side in terms of things that'll be, while the trip was fascinating, back to what Randy said, the primary purpose was one of economic development, and so we think there's some big opportunity there, and we're going to continue to follow through on that. I think there'll be several things that come out of that.
All right, so this can be for both of you. We understand that you want to make another trip to Israel. So where do you want to go, and when do you plan on going?
I think I'm going to be left out of that trip, unfortunately, but we'll work on that. I think Bill plans to take, let me just say, the entire time we were there, we wished we'd had our entire family with us, and particularly our son, who loves history, and our two son-in-laws. So I think it'll be a guy trip next time. So maybe I'll get to go the third time. Is that right?
You go with the women. So, but I will say this, it's... the Psalms continually encourage us to praise God together. And I think there's a reason for that. It's because if you see something incredible, you want to show somebody, right? If you're a sports fan and you're watching Sports Center and somebody makes the most incredible play, you yell, "Hey, come watch this." Whatever it is, if you go see some beautiful sight. Well, I felt like that in the whole time we were in Israel. So the plan, and I'm sure there'll be a subsequent girls trip, but I have a son and two sons-in-law, is to hopefully next year we're working on a plan to go back with the guys trip.
So Crissy, you touched on this a little bit in what you said, but now that you've been to Israel, how has your perceptions of Israel and the people of Israel changed now that you've gone and seen and come back?
Well, I think, as I said before, I didn't realize what a small nation, what a small land mass, but how many people were there, and the stories of how they got there, or how their parents came, or their grandparents, or why they were there, were all very, very interesting to me. That was something I truly learned. And again, about how angry their neighbors are and how close they are, and the importance of that, and living in that, and what that would be like. And I think what you're doing with the high school kids and taking them over there is really important, because I think that everybody in this room probably understands these issues, but we have to hand that down to our younger generation and help them understand the issues. And so then they're going to hear different rhetoric in their generation than we have heard. So it's even more important. I'm really proud of y'all for doing that.
I think one of the things I'd say is this. I'm going to make a general statement from somebody who's in public office, and the mayor can say this and say the same thing. There's some other folks here who are in elected office. The reality is the problems in our world are way more complex than the news media wants to make them. And I'll make a comment on the current election cycle. It is really easy to get up and say, here's a simple answer. Bang. But the reality is that if the answers were simple, we would have already gotten there. And one of the things that you see when you go to Israel is how complex they are. A friend of mine who's in Washington, been involved for a long time, says Israel sometimes makes it hard to be their friend. They don't always make the best decisions in my mind, but they're still the best friend we have going in that region. And it's critical for us that Israel be assisted in protecting itself in those challenges, and that we be strategic in how we do that. When you get to, one of the things that impressed, here's maybe my biggest impression of all is, if you said, so what did you learn about the people in Israel that was encouraging? It's this. It is so encouraging for me to go somewhere where the whole country is on a mission. I don't know that there's anywhere else that I've ever been that compares to that, to where everybody here says, we're really clear what our objective is. We're concerned about the life and death survival of this country and this land that we love. And when you meet a country where everybody's on mission, so whether it's your tour guide or the person who's serving you at a restaurant or the person who's working in the old city or a businessman in Tel Aviv or a woman who's a doctor at a hospital, all of them have this sense of mission. And that is so clarifying. I'd love it if in Tennessee all 6.5 million people said, we have this mission that we're on that really matters to us and that we all agree on. And so everybody in Israel might not always agree on exactly how they're going to do it, but the fact that they agree on this is what our mission is makes it a really clarifying and encouraging place to be.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, go ahead.
Are you
I
done?
was going to say, I think we're actually early, I think.
Okay.
And if there's other questions folks would like to ask, we trust these guys, but we trust you all too, so. Yes.
One of the things that really concerns me when you talk about young people is when I read about what's going on in colleges and how Israel is just so vilified, and young people today in the United States compare Israel to apartheid nations and such. Do you have any thoughts? I think Israel just has a huge PR problem. You know, what are we doing wrong, or what can we do differently to try to get our point across? I just want to live in peace in our land.
So I'd say this, and I'm going to make a more general statement about living in today's media world that's, 24-hour news cycle and social media everywhere, et cetera, that any situation that's complex has a PR problem. Because if the answer is simple, then somebody can go give that answer, or you can, even if it's not, somebody can go give that answer. Oh, that's great. Somebody finally solved the problem, but they probably haven't. So I would say 2 or 3 things. Number one, I think what you're doing here is a huge thing, and I wouldn't underestimate that. I think second, I think as people realize, one of the things, just go look at. I encourage people, let's go look at a map at the area, and this isn't about protecting the U.S.'s interests. It's about protecting things that we care about, like democracy. And look around that region and say, where else do we see any hopeful signs? So is Israel perfect? No, and you all probably, you feel the pain every time something happens that you don't agree with and somebody blames it on you. But while I would say Israel's not perfect, it's still our best hope in that entire region. And there's still people there who are there for purposes that we agree with, that we agree with. Like I said, do we agree with everything they do? No, but if we're picking friends there, I'm picking Israel in terms of being our hope for that part of the world. Yes?
So I go to public school in Memphis, and when it comes to Israel,
Are you going to college?
yes, sir.
Good, all right.
When it comes to education in Tennessee on the Middle East and specifically Israel, do you feel like you do a subsequent job or a sufficient job?
Yeah, you could probably answer that better than I can. I'm governor, but I can't say I know what all we teach in every school. I hope we do. I honestly don't. I probably said you can probably answer that better than I can. I sometimes get concerned in any difficult, complex situation. I keep saying complex, but it really is. That the way we have to move through, whether it be a world politics course or a history course, doesn't really leave you a chance to dive into the nuances of things, whether it be Israel or a lot of other things, and that would be a concern of mine in general. Maybe a couple more? Yes, sir.
Governor, I don't really have a question. I just have a comment I want to make on behalf of college students across the state of Tennessee.
Thank you. Anybody else? Yeah, we'll do one last question.
This is a non-Israel question. It deals with some of the issues you're trying to get through Tennessee, like what is Insure Tennessee, like what is more funding of our highway system. I know you're up against a lot of things. How are you going to accomplish those goals?
I can use some help. Two different issues he referred to. We've actually gotten a lot done with the legislature, and I mean things like the Tennessee Promise is the first state in the country to 2 years free of community college or technical school to any high school senior, and some things. The two challenges that you mentioned, one was Insure Tennessee. It was what we think is an innovative approach to the expansion of Medicaid. That issue is so caught up with politics, to be honest with you, because there's such strong feelings pro or con around the president right now. We thought what we proposed was something that A, wasn't going to cost the state anything, and B, was a way that really was going to start having a more market-based healthcare system. Just to be blunt, I think because of the connections to the president and Obamacare, which is not very popular in the state, we could not get that passed. I don't know if we will this year or not. To be honest with you, it'll be really difficult because it's an election year. I'm hoping once this presidential election is over, that next year we can sit down and finally have a real conversation about it. The infrastructure conversation is another one. It's hard, and nobody ever wants to raise taxes, but the way we pay for roads and bridges in this state and critical projects like Lamar Avenue down here, that's kind of the part of the transportation hub that makes Memphis, is the tax that you pay when you buy gas or diesel. The good news is everybody in here, I don't know what you drove 20 years ago, but I guarantee you get a lot better gas mileage now than you did 20 years ago. Even if you drove a Yukon, then you drive a Yukon now, you still get a lot better mileage. But every time you get better mileage, that's less that you pay to drive on the roads. Meantime, it costs us a lot more to build those roads. So we got a fundamental problem. What I'm going to try to do, to be honest with you, is use the next year to educate folks on what the situation is, and that a critical problem, like I could pick it on Lamar Avenue, but I could do the same thing all around the state, that everybody says, well, that project's funded, it's going to or approved, it's going to happen, right? So, well, it's approved but not funded, and to tell people why we need to do something on that. Let me just wrap up with two things. I'm going to say something about, since Scott introduced me as Phil Bredesen. One of the fun things about going on a trip like this is with somebody who loves a place is you get to know them. And Crissy and I had fun getting to know Jill and Scott and so many others that went on this trip. And I always felt it's kind of had a lot in common. It's a little bit the same color hair, we're kind of the same build. We both in business. We both married women from Memphis and both married over our heads. And we have so much in common. I just felt like there's this kind of one big obstacle that's separating us. And I'm hoping we can get past it. When I found out he was an Alabama fan, that difference just made it really hard. So let me just say this. I am so grateful for the opportunity to be here. I'm so grateful for the discouraging thing about our job is when people don't care. I can take people disagreeing. It's no problem. It's a little problem. But I'm okay when people disagree, but it's just really hard when people don't care. And I love what you're doing here, and I really do think it makes a big difference. So, Crissy and I love the jobs that you allow us to do, and we're honored to be here today. Thanks so much.
Thank you guys so much for coming. We really appreciate it. Gary Kaplan, the chairman of JCP.
Hi. I too want to thank you guys so much, Governor and First Lady Haslem, for being here today. Not only for taking time to be with us today, for taking time out of your busy schedule to lead a trip to Israel, and for understanding the great opportunities that exist business-wise, partnerships between Israel and the state of Tennessee. We have a gift for you today. Laura, my noble emissary from Jewish Community Partners. It's a collection box for charitable gifts. In Judaism, we call it a tzedakah box. Charitable giving is a duty in Judaism. We fulfill this responsibility through our financial support of the Jewish and general community. We felt that this was a fitting gift for the two of you, and we hope you remember our gratitude for all you do for the state of Tennessee and now hopefully for the state of Israel, so that every time you look at that tzedakah box, you'll think of us and think of Israel. Before I call on our program to complete with the cantors coming up, I want to thank Scott Nodowich and Andy Groveman for their incredible leadership in going on this mission of economic development, but also for all they do on behalf of our community every day of the year. And to all of you who came to the program today, thank you for your support of Jewish Community Partners. I look around the room and I see such great supporters of what we're trying to do for the community, and it's gratifying, and I would echo your comments, Governor. Everybody should care. That's the main thing we have to overcome. Apathy is not a good attribute for any of us when needs need to be met on behalf of the community. Let's see. I'm pleased to invite you to hold the date for another major community event being held on February 22nd, as Israel's ambassador to the United States, Ron Dermer, will be visiting Memphis. It's a great honor for us to be having him come to Memphis, and we will be getting further information out. But remember, February 22nd, Israel's ambassador to the U.S., Ron Dermer. And now I'm pleased to invite our community cantors forward to sing the national anthem in Hatikva. Everybody's always glad to see me come up because it's always at the end of the meeting. So.
So